Welcome to Your Guide to Living in San Diego podcast. My name is Kyle Whissel, your host with Whissel Realty Group here in San Diego. The goal of the podcast is to answer the questions that you have for us. So if you ever have a question, you can throw it in the comment section here on YouTube, or there's a phone number down in the description. You can call us or text us any questions you ever have. Happy to answer those questions and just be your guide to living here in San Diego. So with that said, I'm joined by Mr. Bryan Koci. Let's jump into it.
Kyle, looking at the real estate market from 2024, looking ahead to 25, what are the biggest trends that you saw in San Diego in 2024 that you expect to see in 2025?
So what was interesting in 2024, we expected there to be a decrease in mortgage rates, which would ultimately lead to a increase in prices. And we saw rates come down partway through the year and then shoot back up toward the end of the year, where we actually finished the year with rates very, very similar to where we started the year. Now, interestingly enough, we saw prices go up quite a bit in the first half of the year and fall in the second half of the year. At the end of 2024, we're still finishing in positive territory when it comes to pricing, but probably not as much as some people expected because we didn't get the rates to drop the same way that we expected. As we do head into 2025, we obviously have a new administration that's going to be taking over, a lot of policy changes. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how a lot of that stuff plays out. We've already seen some of the early indicators with the stock market shooting up, with cryptocurrency shooting up. So there's a lot of investor optimism in some of these more risky investments. As that's happened, that's a part of what has caused mortgage rates to go up, because as opposed to people keeping their money into bonds, which help keep mortgage rates down, they've taken their money out of bonds, put them into more risky investments, which has led to rates going up. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. You have optimism in the the overall economy with Trump taking over, but then you have people being a little bit more risky with some of their investments. So it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out. If you look at what all of the big predictors, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ivy Zelman, Zillow, NAR, Mortgage Bankers Association, all these different organizations, the majority of them see home prices going up somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2 to 5% in the year 2025. I fall more on the optimistic side of the equation, where I think 5 is probably our bare minimum that you're going to see. San Diego tends to, go up more than the rest of the country, also go down more than the rest of the country as things move. So with the rest of the country falling in that 2 to 5% range, I think San Diego, we're going to fall more in that 5 to 10% range. So I'm actually very optimistic about the direction that we're headed in 2025, primarily because I think there's still a lot of pent up buyer demand. A lot of people have been wanting to buy, have been waiting for rates to get better to buy. I do think that we're going to saw this, initial surge in rates going up when Trump was elected, but I think we're starting to see some of those rates pull back a little bit. And as rates continue to pull back, the pent up buyer demand, and we hit the, spring buying season, I do think you'll start to see prices trend up, especially in the first half of 2025.
So you're seeing prices go up. And also,
not yet, but I believe that, again, first half of 2024 prices went up, second half of 2024 prices went down. First half of 2025, I'm very optimistic we'll see prices go up, and then we'll just kind of see. But Q1, Q2, I think are going to be really good for the real estate market.
What do you see that doing in terms of overall affordability in San Diego?
It depends where the rates go, because prices could go up, rates could go down, and that could actually increase affordability, meaning it's easier, it's more affordable for people to purchase. So it's a combination of two different factors between rates and price. Again, I think rates will come down. I think price will go up. So where does affordability go? I don't know that you're going to see a significant move in affordability one direction or the other, because the two opposite forces will probably keep things relatively in line with where they are today. So I don't see massive change in overall affordability.
In what sector of the real estate market did you see the highest amount of growth? Is it in condos? Is it in luxury properties? Which ones did you see the highest amount of growth, and do you still expect it to grow that pace?
Yeah, where I see a lot of the growth happening is on entry-level homes. Where things have been a little bit stalled out is people that are what we refer to as move-up buyers. That's typically where somebody maybe lives in a condo and they want to move up to a house. So they sell the condo, they buy the house. That market has been paralyzed a little bit because if you sell your condo and you bought that condo, 4 or 5 years ago, you have a rate that's, 2-3%. And you sell, and now you're going to go buy, and you're going to pay like a 6 or 7% rate. So that's paralyzed a lot of people from moving, and they're just staying put in that condo. Whereas first-time buyers, their current interest rate's 100% because they're renting, right? Like it's 100% interest on rent. There's no, you're not paying off any equity when you're renting. So for a first-time home buyer coming from 100% rate to 6 or 7% is not so bad. So we've seen a lot more first-time home buyers getting into the market, where we've seen a slowdown in move-up buyers in the market.
So talking about buyers and move-up buyers, let's move into the buyer section here. Are there any kind of unique loan opportunities that you know of now that people should be looking at in 2025?
Yeah, so there's 3 things to really consider that most real estate agents probably aren't talking to you about. So number 1 is going to be assumable mortgages. So if a homeowner purchased a home and they have a USDA, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an FHA, Federal Housing Administration, or VA, Veterans Administration, if they are Veterans Affairs, if they have a mortgage that's any one of those 3 types, their mortgage is assumable, which means you could come in and purchase their home and assume their existing mortgage. And so we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that a lot of people that bought homes 4 or 5 years ago, they have rates in the 2s, 3s, 4s. Well, if you go get a mortgage today, you're paying 6s or 7s. Wouldn't it be nice to buy a home and get a rate in the 2s, 3s, or 4s versus 6s or 7s? I'd sure love that. Well, if somebody has one of those 3 loan types, you could come in and purchase their home and not only buy it at today's price, but also buy it at 5 years ago rate. So you're getting the best of both worlds. So 1, you want to look out for those assumable mortgages. 2, you want to look out for seller financing opportunities. So seller financing opportunities could be standalone, or they could be in conjunction with an assumption. So if you're going to assume a mortgage, let's say you're buying a home for $1 million and the seller owes $500,000, that's great that you could assume their $500,000 mortgage, but you have a $500,000 gap between the mortgage amount and the purchase price. If you don't have that $500,000, you could potentially have a seller carry a second there to bridge that gap so you don't have to come in with $500,000 down. So that would be where you're running a seller financing in conjunction with an assumable mortgage. Alternatively, there's people who owe nothing to very little on their existing mortgage, and they don't want to cash in. They want to sell, but they don't actually want to take all that cash, and they might want to just be the bank for you, which is known as seller financing. So it's possible that a seller could finance, and maybe that seller might be more lenient with their credit requirements, where you might not be able to qualify for a traditional mortgage, or maybe that seller might be willing to offer a lower rate than a traditional mortgage lender. So there's some room to play there, but seller financing is another thing that you should look into. And ultimately, if there's a property you're interested in, it never hurts to ask if the seller is open to seller financing.
So that was 2, right?
Yep. 3rd is what's called subject to financing. So we mentioned the 3 primary loan types that are assumable automatically. There's other loan types out there that might not be assumable. In those scenarios, if the mortgage is not assumable, you could actually purchase a home subject to the existing financing. So in that scenario, the seller deeds the property to you, but the mortgage stays in their name. And now you actually make the mortgage payments on their behalf to the mortgage company. And now you might end up in that same scenario where you have a big gap between the mortgage that you're taking ownership of subject to. So you could also combine seller financing there, just like you could with an assumption. Subject to financing, definitely more complicated. Definitely want to have attorneys involved to help you out with that. Whereas an assumable mortgage, you could actually do that very cleanly. It's much more simple, where subject to a little bit more complicated there. So you want to make sure that you're working with an expert. We've obviously retained some experts on our end so that when we do have a scenario where you want to purchase a home subject to the existing financing because the existing financing has a better rate than today's rate, that's where our team can help you out there. And we can make sure that we get it done in the right way so that you don't have any issues down the road.
Very cool. That was a long answer, but it was a good answer.
I've done this a couple times.
Yeah. When someone is looking to buy a house, what are some red flags that they may not see that you as an agent obviously know?
Yeah, so some red flags for me, and this is the same for buyers, is you always want to look for unfinished projects when you're walking through a home. Typically, if somebody leaves a lot of projects unfinished, if they leave one project unfinished, they leave a lot of projects unfinished. And you don't want to buy a home that has a lot of unfinished projects, or often referred to as deferred maintenance. You want to have a home, right? Like I know when I bought a car, and I go look at the car and they like pull out a notebook and they have a record of every single service that was done on that car. Now I'm much more inclined to buy that car, where I go look at the other car and they're like, oh, it's fine, it's fine. They're literally spitting and wiping on, trying to pretend like the dent that's there is not really there. Like the same thing goes with homes. If a home is very well cared for, right, it's going to be a lot more attractive. Whereas a home that's got deferred maintenance, right, you see some of it. What else is deferred? So looking for unfinished projects or deferred maintenance is definitely something that you want to look out for. Other things, if you see cracks in the exterior, or even on the drywall or plaster on the inside, if you see things that are kind of more of a stair crack pattern, that usually is more indicative of just some settlement where the tape between the drywall pieces has separated. That's less concerning. You still want to get it looked at by a professional. The stuff that's more of a red flag is diagonal cracking, which is more indicative of more serious movement with the foundation. So I'm always looking for those cracks, especially the diagonal cracks. I'm also looking for any sort of indications of any water damage. So whether I see discoloration in the ceilings or the baseboards or anything like that, repairing the water damage, which could potentially lead to mold, that could be extremely costly. So any sort of water damage is another thing that I really try to look out for when walking through a home.
One more questions before we move on to home sellers. What do you think is the most overlooked factor when people are buying a house?
The most overlooked factor when people are buying a house is that they need to understand not just the four walls and what's inside of them. They need to understand the community that you're buying a home in, because you do have to live in this thing. It could be absolutely stunning and gorgeous inside, but if it's a neighborhood that's not in alignment with your lifestyle, you shouldn't buy it. At the end of the day, and I was guilty of this when I first got in the industry, I was so focused on getting a good deal, I wasn't focused on actually like the fact I have to live in this freaking house. So, like I have young kids, like I don't want to live on a super busy street. Like that's just not a good fit for me. So even though the home might be amazing, if cars are driving by our driveway at 50 miles an hour and I have a 2-year-old, like that's not a good fit. That doesn't fit my lifestyle, my phase of life that I'm in. So think about the phase of life you're in, the lifestyle that you want to live. Make sure that not only is the home right, but the location of the home, that it's going to be conducive to your stage of life you're in and the lifestyle that you want to live. So that I think is one of the most overlooked thing when people are purchasing a home.
Very cool. I think that's a really good. It's a really good point.
There you go. Yeah.
It's the New Year's. It's taking a minute to get in here. So switching over to home sellers. If someone's listening to this and say, okay, cool, that's all good for buying. A lot of times they sell their house and then buy a new one. But let's talk about the selling process. You mentioned that the price or the homes prices were going kind of crazy last year, up and down.
Yes.
How can a homeowner now look at data from last year to help kind of understand where their home is priced at or will be priced at for this year?
Yeah, the most important thing when pricing a home is you definitely have to look backward and see what comparable homes have sold for. That's going to be very helpful. But you also need to look forward at what's my current competition and how is that competition going to play out? We're coming out of a declining market right now. So we can't look at comps from 6 months ago, because we know for a fact values have declined over the last 6 months. So something that sold 6 months ago, we can't hang our hat on that and price in line with what sold 6 months ago. We know we're in a declining market, so we need to price more in line with what sold in the last 60 or 90 days. So I think that's really important. Then additionally, we need to look at what's our current competition right? If there's in your neighborhood, there's 2 homes a month selling, and currently there's 10 homes for sale, that's not ideal, right? That means that if there's 10 homes for sale, 2 homes selling a month, there's 5 months of supply. If nothing else came for sale, it would take 5 months to sell all 10 of those homes based on the current rate of sale. If you're in a scenario where you have that much inventory, you've also got to factor that into your pricing, and you've got to price a little bit more on the conservative side, meaning price it lower. Alternatively, if there's 2 homes selling a month and there's literally 1 home on the market right now, that means you have half a month of inventory. We could actually be a little bit more aggressive with the pricing and price it a little bit higher. So we've got to look backward as well as look forward when it comes to pricing to ultimately make sure we price the home correctly, and not all markets are not created equal. So your coastal markets are going to be different than your inland markets. Your starter price point markets are going to be different than your luxury markets. So that's where having a expert guide you through this process is really, really important.
Now, Kyle, you have been in the real estate business for a long time. 20 years?
This is my 20th year.
Congratulations. Next year, you'll be able to drink. So you've been here for 20 years. Not only have you helped people buy and sell, you've also bought and sold a lot of your own investment properties. I know you have rentals and all that. One thing that I want to know, this comes from you flipping, but also in the market. What have you seen in terms of small upgrades or improvements yield the biggest ROI when selling your house?
So the projects that give the biggest ROI when selling is, number 1, completing incomplete projects. There's nothing that's going to give you a higher ROI. Now, it's actually calculated a little bit differently, because if you don't complete those projects, they're actually going to have a negative impact on the value. So you're actually avoiding negative value. You're not actually adding value so much. It depends on how we look at it. But the return on the investment for completing incomplete projects, hands down the number 1 place that you can spend money. And then we start to look at other things that are really going to pop for a buyer that are very low cost. So let's assume we have a single family home as opposed to a condo where you have some control over the facade of the building. Really making sure that the landscaping is dialed in. When somebody walks up to that home, we want to make sure that the grass is green, that it's mowed, that it's maintained. We want to have some flowers, some pops of color. So when they walk up, it has life to it. It has energy to it, because it's cheesy, but first impression's a lasting impression. You only get one chance to make one. So we should probably make the right one. So that's going to be huge. Once people are inside, things that are very inexpensive that have a high return on investment is carpet and paint. Like, the cost to carpet a room is hundreds of dollars. The cost to paint a room is hundreds of dollars, depending on how big your room is. But you're talking about things that, a traditional bedroom, to paint and carpet a bedroom might be $1,000. But the return on that is massive, as opposed to if you have old, dingy carpet, stinky carpet, you have, maybe you let your kids have 5 different colors on the walls and have graffiti walls and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, the cost to just do simple carpet and paint is so easy. Other ones that are really inexpensive is just refurbishing cabinets and countertops. So if you take your existing cabinets, assuming you don't have cheap, shitty cabinets that are falling apart, if you actually have, decent cabinets that are just an outdated color, you have outdated hardware, like just painting those, which we prefer to lacquer them as opposed to traditional paint, lacquering your cabinets white, putting updated hardware, oil rub bronze or brush nickel or satin nickel, something like that. The cost to do that is really low. And then you could put countertops in at a really inexpensive rate, like especially if you don't have anything like, giant custom islands. If you just have more of a traditional L-shaped kitchen, you could go, there's, counter manufacturers here in San Diego where you could buy an 8-foot prefab slab of quartz, where when I say prefab, it has a little backsplash, it is bull-nosed on the edge, for a few $100. So you could very easily dress up a kitchen by lacquering the cabinets, putting new hardware, and then putting some new countertops on there for very, very small amount of money versus gutting a whole kitchen and tearing it out, which is super expensive. So you could do that in kitchen, especially bathrooms. It's really inexpensive to do that in a bathroom. So those are a few things that are on the more, inexpensive side that could have a really big impact.
Very cool. Now, sometimes people say, well, I don't know if I should sell now or should I just rent it out? Because people get really excited about renting their home out.
Because they've never been a landlord.
Could be. So what's the better option?
For sure. So the key is to just run a rent versus sell analysis, which is something that we offer at no cost. The biggest thing that I found most people interested in renting versus selling that they're failing to consider is the cost of operating a rental property. So you could pull this up on any website out there, Zillow or any Investopedia, any of these websites, and they'll help you figure out what you should factor for your operating expenses when you're managing a rental property. Now, there's all kinds of variables that go into it, but most of them are going to be around 40%. Now, what's included in that 40%? That's taxes, that's insurance, that's maintenance, that's repairs, that is vacancy, that's credit loss, all these different factors. But you should factor about 40%. So what I find is a lot of people, they'll come to me and say, hey, Kyle, I'm just going to rent this thing out. My mortgage is $4,000. I could rent this thing for $5,000. So I'm going to make $1,000 a month. Doesn't exactly work that way because we've got to take 40% off of that $5,000 rent for expenses. So if you take 40% of $5,000, that's $2,000. So take that away, you now have $3,000 left over for your $4,000 mortgage. You are upside down $1,000 a month. Do you really want to hold on to something and be upside down $1,000 a month? Is that really worth it? Additionally, by converting it from a primary residence into a rental, there's tax implications to factor in there where you could sell your primary residence and you could sell that thing tax-free up to $250,000 if you're single, $500,000 if you're married, where if you turn it into a rental, after 3 years, that's now considered an investment property. And if you go to sell it, now you're going to incur capital gains tax when you sell it, where you could have sold it tax-free up to $250,000 or $500,000. So 2 super important things to consider when looking at renting versus selling is figuring out your operating expenses if you're going to rent it and factoring in the tax implications of converting it over to an investment property versus a primary residence. And again, if you want, reach out to us. Phone numbers down in the description below. We'll do a free rent versus sell analysis for you so you could decide which is going to be the better option for you.
Cool. One more on home sellers before we go into investing in real estate. Is it better to sell now, early in the year, first quarter, or should someone wait until later in the year?
When it comes to timing of when to sell, you should sell at what works for your lifestyle. If you're trying to time the market, it's so freaking hard to time the market. And if you could go both directions with it. If you sell in the spring, there's more competition from other buyers. There's also more homes for sale. If you wait until the winter, I could say there's less competition from buyers. There's also less homes for sale. So no matter how you slice it, there's going to be pros and cons to the different seasons. I would just recommend doing what's best for your lifestyle. There's a reason that a lot of people buy homes in the spring and summertime because they want to purchase that home and they want to move when the school year is over with. So it's minimal disruption for their children. That's why you see the spring and summer tend to be the busiest time of year, whereas the fall and the winter tend to be slower times of the year because the change in lifestyle of moving your kid in the middle of a school year is not for everybody. I wouldn't want to do that for me with my kids. Maybe you're cool with it and that's fine. But you got to do what's best for you and for your stage of life and lifestyle. And ultimately, there's not a right or wrong answer there because there's pros and cons to every season of the year.
And even if they do sell now in the first quarter and they want to wait until their kids are out, there are some ways to go about doing rent backs or longer escrow, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's say you wanted to sell now, maybe you don't feel optimistic about the direction the market's headed. Maybe you think prices are going to come down between now and the end of the school year. You could sell your home now and we could structure a deal where you could stay in that home and rent it back for as long as we can negotiate. It depends on the type of buyer and everything. There's limitations to how many months that rent back could be. But if you're thinking you want to move out of the house in, let's say, May, you actually want to get that home on the market now because in today's market, it's taking a month or two to get a buyer for the home. Then you've got your escrow period, which on average is about 30 days. We could push that to as much as 60 days. And then you could rent it back for a month or two on top of that. So if you put all that together, let's say it's 30 days to get it under contract. Then you could go a 2-month escrow and a 2-month rent back. You're at 5 months. Guess what? We're already, into those May, June months at this point. So, if you're thinking you want to move when the school year is over, you actually want to get that process started now as opposed to waiting for school to be over.
Cool. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Kyle, you are knee deep in investments. I see you post on your Instagram about big developments you're doing, but also you've done and you still do smaller flips as well. And so if someone is listening to this and wants to start looking at investing and not doing a big deal, but more single family stuff, what areas or neighborhoods are you seeing are the best to kind of look into?
Yeah, when it comes to flipping, you typically want to try to find the older neighborhoods is where you're going to find the best opportunities, because you're just going to have homes that have more deferred maintenance, that are more outdated, that have, less desirable floor plans in them. So there just tends to be more opportunities where you're buying a home that's 60, 70 years old, that's never been updated. There's more upside in that. Whereas if you're buying a home that's 5 years old, it's harder to add value to a home that's 5 years old as opposed to a home that's 50 years old. So focusing on some of those areas where there's more of that opportunity. Also, there's, areas where floor plans were very choppy, and you had especially the 80s and 90s, there was this era where they did these floor plans where you had like a tiny living room and a tiny family room as opposed to just one big great room. And so there's opportunities where you have these homes that have these little family room and little living room, and you can open them up and make, one big great room out of it and make it a more modern floor plan. So those are the types of things where I think you find the most opportunity, because when you're flipping, you want the home to be in the worst condition possible. Obviously, depending on your tolerance for flipping, maybe you don't want to take on a massive foundation project, but you want the homes that have more upside in them, because that's how you make money as a flipper.
So give me a couple areas to look into.
Areas, anything in the mid-city area of San Diego. When I say mid-city, that's the middle of the city. So things like North Park, Normal Heights, Hillcrest, City Heights, Kensington, those types of areas. I like that. I also really like the areas around Claremont, Linda Vista, Bay Park, Bay Ho. I like those areas a lot. Those were all built a lot of those in the 60s and 70s. Serra Mesa also there. So I like those areas a lot. There are a lot of opportunity to add value. And the cost to rehab is very similar to other parts of town. So if we can be in Claremont, where you're seeing a lot of homes selling for $2 million plus rehab now, that's great, right? If I can buy something around $1 million, put $300,000 or $400,000 into it, sell it closer to $2 million, that's a really good return.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Doesn't suck.
Are there any unique tax benefits to people buying for investments in 2025?
So the buying in 2025 tax incentives to buy, the biggest thing is depreciation. And we're going to see where things go with Trump coming back into the White House. The big thing that he put together when he was in power last time was something called bonus depreciation. So the way that a lot of very, very wealthy people, including Donald Trump and a lot of other real estate people, minimize the amount of taxes they pay is by depreciation, which is where you take the value of a property and you write that off over a period of time. The old school traditional way of doing that is just to take, assuming it's a residential property, take the value of the property, not the land, the property itself, divide that by 27.5, and you can write that off every year. So if it was a $2.75 million property, divide that by 27.5, that's $100,000. You get a $100,000 write-off every year for the next 27.5 years. That's great, right? Depending on your tax bracket, which I've heard California's tax bracket's going up another % if you're in the highest income bracket. That could be great. You might be saving yourself $50,000 or so. Then there's kind of 2.0 version of depreciation, which is where you do a cost segregation analysis, where instead of just dividing by 27 and a half and writing that much off per year, you break down all the different components of the property. You're taking the walls, the windows, the doors, the floors, the roof, the electrical, the HVAC, and you're breaking that down into different buckets, typically a 5-year, a 15-year, and a 27.5-year bucket. And so now the things that fall in that 5-year bucket, you could write all of those off in 5 years and 15 years and 27.5 years. So you can front load a lot of that depreciation as opposed to stretching it over 27.5 years. Then bonus depreciation is kind of the third version of this. When this was originally put into place, anything that fell within the 5-year, 15-year buckets, you could write 100% of that off the year you put the property in service. That could be huge. We bought this property we're sitting in today in 2021, and we were able to write off everything that fit into those two buckets off. First year, massive tax savings. Currently, as it sits for 2025, you're going to be able to write off 60% of whatever falls in those 5 and 15-year buckets. So let's say there was $1 million that fit into those two buckets. You could write off $600,000 the day you put the property in service, which is great. There's a lot of belief, and it was in Trump's tax proposal to bring back the 100% bonus depreciation. So if he did, and let's say 100,000 fit into that 5 and 15-year buckets, you could write off the full $1 million as opposed to 60% of that. At the end of the day, over 27.5 years, you're going to write the same amount off. It's just a matter of how much are you front loading versus back loading.
Cool. What's the best way for an investor to find undervalued homes in San Diego?
The best way for an investor to find undervalued homes in San Diego is to ultimately work with an agent who has access to homes that are not on the market. So our team in 2024 sold over 800 homes between San Diego and Riverside counties. We're in hundreds of living rooms and dining rooms on a regular basis, meeting with people who are interested in selling. And some of those decide, hey, I want to sell. I want to put it on the MLS and do the traditional route. But we run into other people that don't want their sale to be public for all kinds of different reasons. I've helped a person running for political office that didn't want their sale to be public. I've dealt with people going through divorces that don't want their sale to be public, or going through foreclosure, right? There's a variety of reasons where people don't want their sale. Maybe they're high profile and they don't want people seeing it. So there's a variety of reasons why somebody might want to sell their home off market. Or maybe, hoarder houses. We're talking about flips. I've been in a ton of hoarder houses over the years, and they're embarrassed, right? They don't want people to see the way that they've lived. And so they don't want pictures of the inside of their home public. So there's a variety of reasons. And so working with an agent like us at Whissel, we can get you access to a lot of those. And even the ones that are coming to the market, we can also give you access to them before they hit the market, because there's always a period of time that's going to elapse from when we sign the listing to when that listing actually goes on the MLS, right? They got to get the home ready. We got to shoot photos and videos and floor plans and 3D tours and all that stuff. There's usually a 2 or 3 week period there where we might also be able to get you into homes before they go public.
Very cool. Last one.
Bring it.
What trends in rental demand are shaping the way shaping the investment landscape?
So the trends with rental demand is rents have been flat to declining in most of the country. In San Diego, I would say we're closer to the flat side of things. In other parts of the country, you're right, San Diego, we're very landlocked. We have this thing called the ocean to the west, the desert to the east, the military base to the north, and Mexico to the south. We're very landlocked in San Diego. So we haven't been able to build the number of rental units that somewhere like Austin, Texas, which is, arguably infinite supply of land. They've just been building communities on top of communities on top of communities out there. They've seen more of the declining rents in areas like that. So we definitely have seen some changes in rents where they were going up 20% a year during COVID. We've, lost some of those gains and more kind of flattened out. What you are going to see a lot of in San Diego is the city of San Diego specifically has really been encouraging developers to bring units to the market. We have almost 200 units in the pipeline right now that we're bringing to the market. And a lot of these units that are coming to the market tend to be smaller, more affordable units. Some of them are actually like dedicated as affordable. Depending on the developer, the project, the guidelines in which they built, they're actually mandated to have a certain percentage of them be considered affordable. So you're going to find a lot more smaller units, less amenitized units coming to the market, where it feels like everything that's been built for the last 10 years are these like over amenitized buildings where you have like tanning salons and yoga studios and like 46 pools and 25 spas and, pickleball courts everywhere. Like, not everybody wants all of that. And so if you can avoid all those things that you're paying for that maybe you don't need, that's again what we're trying to build is things that are going to be good quality housing at a affordable price without all the fluff that a lot of us don't need.
Cool. If someone has a question, wants more information, how can they reach out?
For sure. So if you're watching this video, if you want to connect with us, if you just have a question you want to have us answer on the show, you could throw it in the comment section. We'll make sure that we bring it up on the next episode. Also, our phone number and all of our contact info is going to be in the description down below. So feel free to call or text us anytime. Love to learn a little bit more about your particular situation. We could put a plan in place to help you accomplish every single one of your goals. With that said, my name is Kyle Whissel, your guide to living in San Diego. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast.